So kicking things off just like that, in at number 10 is The Wreck of the Titan. A book published nearly 15 years before the sinking of the Titanic might have actually predicted its fate. Well, this book was named Wreck of the Titan after it had a name change. Well, it mentioned a ship that was the largest one to exist at the time and was deemed unsinkable. Sound familiar? Yeah, I think so. Well, in the book, the ship hit an iceberg and sank, killing a large number of people due to a shortage of lifeboats. Sounds a little bit familiar, right? Well, next up on this list, in at number 9 is The Curse. One legend claims that the Titanic was cursed. Well, on an account that it was being built by Protestants instead of Catholics, the Titan was in fact built in Belfast, Ireland, which had a large number of Protestants and a few Catholics, which made the chances of hiring a Catholic slimmer. But a lot of the press twisted this story, implying that the manufacturers were vehemently anti-Catholics, and the White Star Line's practice of not christening their ships placed a curse upon them. So religion has a lot to do with this one. And at number 8, we have a coal fire sank the ship. I know this theory has been going around for many years. Well, a newer theory states that a coal fire was actually responsible for the sinking of the ship. So why are we talking about this iceberg? And that's what wreaked havoc to the structure. Well, experts say that the coal fire, which actually did happen, but many say that it wasn't the cause of the sinking of the Titanic. Well, it was known long before the Titanic set sail. So the fire was happening and then the Titanic set sail. But for some reason, there was no concern about the fire. So I'm not sure what's going on with this one. So let's move right along. And at number 7, we have sacrificial sinking. Another legend says that the Titanic was actually sacrificed by the crew because after it was built, it was expected that she would end up losing the company money. So you kind of know where I'm going with this one. People who defended this theory back it up by arguing that since the crew received a warning of icebergs, yet continued to go north instead of south, instead of going south out of their path, then this is why the speculations are saying then they might have intended to sink it. They were going right to the icebergs. Number 6 is actually one of the more popular theories on this list about the Titanic. It states that the Titanic never sank. Yeah, you heard that right. A lot of people don't even believe this. It's almost like the moon landing theory. There's speculations on both sides. And you know what? I've heard compelling arguments on both sides. I think the moon landing happened. Let me know if you guys think. And let me know if you guys think the Titanic never sank. Sound off in the comment section below. Well, some people claim that it never sank. That's not to say that they don't believe a ship sank. They just think it was another ship, the Olympic. Apparently, the Olympic was scheduled to be repaired after it was damaged, but the White Star Lines couldn't justify the price. Instead, they swapped it out with the Titanic, knowing that it would sink on the way, and then they'll be able to collect the Titanic's insurance money instead. Honestly, out of all these theories, this one may not sound too far-fetched. All right, number 5 is the Egyptian curse. Okay, so part of this urban legend has already been disproven. Allegedly, this one states that on board the Titanic, there was an ancient Egyptian mummy that was cursed. Legend has it that it has already brought traumas to its previous handlers, including a loss of loved ones, loss of money, loss of life. Apparently, there was somebody in the US who wanted to buy it, but on the faithful trip overseas, the mummy cursed the Titanic and caused it to sink. So it was no iceberg, it was no fire, it was actually this mummy. Apparently, there was no proof that it was ever on the Titanic though, so this was quickly debunked. The mummy is sitting in a British museum, so if it was on board the Titanic, wouldn't it have sank with it? Next up, number 4 is the captain caused even more deaths than necessary. Despite a lot of people praising Captain Smith as being a hero during the sinking of the Titanic, he was directly responsible for a lot more people dying than necessary. More accurately, the captain knowingly left a lot of the seats in the lifeboats vacant, sometimes filling boats with a 65-person capacity with fewer than 30 people. So what is going on there? Yeah, it's true that there weren't enough lifeboats for the amount of people on board, but it's more than likely that if he ordered for these boats to be filled to capacity, a lot more people would have survived. Our number 3 spot is all about class inequality. This is one myth that was heavily popularized by the James Cameron movie Titanic, and a scene that depicted the third-class passengers being locked below deck to prevent them from taking up room on the lifeboats. While they weren't technically locked downstairs in real life, it was incredibly difficult for them to get above deck. They had to make their way through a labyrinth of halls and staircases, and some of these exits were blocked off. There were also no lifeboats on the third deck class decks, just the first and second class decks. It seems to me, and let me know if you guys can dispute this one, but is Was this ship designed for only the wealthy to survive in case of a crash? And at number 2, there's a legend that claims that men dressed as women to con their way onto lifeboats. So this one is pretty self-explanatory in my opinion. We all saw the movie, they took women and kids first. We saw some men trying to jump on. If this was me, I would fight to survive, so I would try to dress as a woman to try to get on that boat. You gotta fight for survival. When the Titanic was sinking, women and children were the first to be boarded on, while leaving men to just wait behind, and for somehow they were going to swim to shore, swim to an island, be saved. Okay, let's be honest here. Let's not sugarcoat this. They were just left to die on the ship. Well, some men allegedly worked their way around this rule by dressing up as women and getting in the lifeboats in disguise. And at number 1 goes to time traveling tourists. The theory of time travel has existed pretty much forever, and some people think that it's a result of some big moments in history. I wish I could time travel to the early 2019 and tell people about this COVID-19 virus and a way to avoid it, and maybe having it contained in the city that it started, so we can avoid this global pandemic. Well, going back to this urban legend claims that a bunch of people from the future decided to use time travel to go check out the Titanic. But there was one problem. They all appeared at the same time, and okay, I know it gets a little bit crazy with this one, but because they appeared all at the same time, they added weight to the ship. I mean, all these new passengers weren't accounted for, and that's how the ship sank. This is probably one of the most far-fetched things that I've ever heard, and I'm just gonna debunk it now and say, no, time travel doesn't exist, so how can this be possible?
Coming in at number 10, we have The Musician. Apparently, the ship's musicians stayed on board playing music to calm passengers until the bitter end. The tragic image of the lonely musicians playing as the ship went down is a classic vignette from the Titanic. It's almost too poetic, but it actually did happen. This urban legend has been fact-checked. Many survivors later told similar tales of seeing the 8 young musicians performing on deck. None, however, survived the disaster. There's some disagreement as to what their final song was. Some survivors recalled hearing "Nearer My God to Thee," while another contemporary account names the last tune as "Autumn." But considering "Nearer My God to Thee" has better mythic resonance, it's the one usually employed in movie adaptations. Coming in at number 9, we have Dorothy Gibson. American silent film actress Dorothy Gibson was one of the approximately 700 survivors of the collision. Upon arriving in New York City unscathed, she immediately began filming Saved from the Titanic, the first film to depict the events of the sinking. It was released in May 1912, a month after the crash. She is famous for wearing the same clothes and shoes in the movie as she had worn during the actual sinking. While the film was successful, it exists only in memories now. The only known print of the film was destroyed in a fire. With no proof, it definitely registers as a legend, but one that could be true. We will never truly know. Up next at number 8, we have the ghosts. Now, this one didn't happen on the Titanic per se, but it's so close that we're gonna throw it on this list. The Titanic Artifact Exhibition at the Luxor Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas apparently has a ghost wandering its grand staircase. Employees and guests alike have seen this mysterious woman who wears a black period dress with a white collar and her hair in a bun. One time, a photographer prepped for the opening of the exhibition and he spotted this woman casually walking down the grand staircase. He was startled as he hadn't seen anyone enter and the staircase was roped off. He assumed she was part of the exhibit and asked if she'd like him to photograph her. She ignored him and he went back to setting up. But suddenly, she was directly behind him. Again, he offered a photograph, and this time, she didn't just ignore him, she vanished. Oh. Keeping up with this whole haunted theme, the Georgia Aquarium also houses potentially haunted artifacts from the Titanic. The employees have claimed to see shadows, hear voices, and even be touched by the spirits. The paranormal activity is so intense that the Sci-Fi Channel's Ghost Hunters came to investigate. Side note, I would really love to be on an episode of Ghost Hunters, so pass the word forward. They reportedly captured a recording of a voice saying, "No, please wait," in the iceberg room. The team also picked up on several cold spots and witnessed a shadowy figure. After reviewing their findings, they concluded that the Titanic exhibit at the Georgia Aquarium is in fact haunted, probably from the lost souls that went down with the ship. Coming in at number 7, we have the girl named Jessie. There's a creepy legend surrounding the Titanic about a young Scottish girl named Jessie. On the same night the ship went down, Jessie was on the verge of dying. In her delirious state, she supposedly spoke of a massive sinking ship and a man named Wally playing a fiddle. She had no way of knowing the Titanic would sink that night, or that Wallace, aka Wally, would be playing the violin for his last time with his band as the ship went down. And at number 6, we have the racing boat. This myth has long been debated and potentially debunked. We've all heard the Titanic was racing for New York, trying to substantiate claims that she was big and bad and fast, and her captain was not to be messed with. This is why the ship strayed into dangerous waters, lurking with icebergs. In truth, people knew Titanic was fast and had the best engines and boilers in her day, but she wasn't a racing boat. At the time of the impact, most of the Titanic's boilers weren't lit, meaning that the ship was casually traveling. Alternatively, if you look at a map of Titanic's route, it's not suitable for setting records. But alas, this urban legend lingered for years, so we've included it on this list. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the SOS. It's said that the Titanic frantically radioed messages as the crew realized she was doomed. But since the incident was late at night, many ships nearby had their radios turned off. However, some ships did respond, and even Titanic's sister ship, Olympic, sent word that they were coming to help. Legend has it that a passing ship, the Samson, saw Titanic's flares but carried on without a second glance. But in reality, the Samson was nowhere near the Titanic. The one ship that could have made it in time was the Californian, but they didn't receive calls for help. The first ship to reach Titanic survivors was the RMS Carpathia, 2 hours after the sinking. In our 4th spot, we have the curses. Out of all the Titanic curses, you'd think that at least one of them would be true. Well, White Star Line made a point of not holding launching spectacles for their ship when it's often a common practice to, for good luck. On most ships' debuts, companies would make a ceremony of transferring the new ship into the water. This involved cheering, blessings, and large crowds, often smashing a bottle of champagne off the bow as a sacrifice. Thing is, White Star Line never participated in such ceremonies with any of their ships, meaning that if this legend is true, the Titanic wasn't blessed or properly bid good luck. And that's why she sank. Moving on to number 3, we have the deliberate sinking. The Titanic is known as a huge disaster in history. The tragedy missed the onset of the First World War by 2 years, but some still speculate that a German U-boat was really behind the ship sinking. A number of Titanic survivors reported to have noticed an unidentified vessel approximately 5 to 6 miles away from the sinking ship, which reportedly lingered until 2 a.m. According to Dr. Franklin Rule's piece in the Huffington Post, Rule speculated that the craft was possibly a submarine that had surfaced to assess the damage it had caused to the Titanic. He also cited survivor testimony about a number of explosions that seemed to go off deep within the ship. He claims the sub may have deliberately targeted the luxury liner or possibly accidentally collided with it. In our 2nd spot, we have the Lookout. Apparently, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, who were crewmen on the Titanic, didn't have access to binoculars during the journey, and therefore couldn't see very far. The ship's 2nd officer was replaced at the last minute and forgot to hand off the key to the lockers that housed the ship's binoculars. The key resurfaced at an auction in 2010, where it was sold for over $130,000. According to the official 1912 inquiry findings, only 37 seconds elapsed between actually seeing the iceberg, calling downstairs, and deciding what course of action to take. Fleet was the lookout who called out the now famous words, "Iceberg right ahead." He survived the sinking, but tragically went on to die by suicide in 1965 after the death of his wife. On the centennial anniversary of the Titanic sinking, a prankster removed a memorial wreath from his gravestone and replaced it with a pair of binoculars and a note apologizing for the lateness of the binoculars. And in our number 1 spot, we have the conspiracy theory. This rumor has everything you could ever want in a conspiracy theory. a man powerful and wealthy enough to play God, overly complicated methods of assassination, a mass casualty event, the Federal Reserve Bank. There's a theory out there that J.P. Morgan sank the Titanic in order to pave the way for the establishment of the Federal Reserve Bank in the U.S. The bank's creation was reportedly opposed by millionaire John Jacob Astor, Benjamin Guggenheim, and Macy's co-owner Isidore Straus. These three wealthy men did indeed lose their lives when the Titanic sank, but Morgan dodged death and disaster when he canceled his trip in the 11th hour. This dude owned the IMM, which in turn owned the White Star Line. Morgan was reportedly supposed to be on the ship, but decided to skip the voyage at the last second. How convenient. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette reported that he decided to linger in Europe in order to buy tapestries for his art collection. But what reason would Morgan have to allegedly sink his own ship? Well, conspiracy theorists say that in interest of clearing away opposition to the Federal Reserve Bank, Morgan somehow manipulated all of his rivals to sail on the ship so that he could sink it. But Layton pointed out that it's almost unimaginable that Morgan could have gotten all three of his major rivals to take the same trip. Like, what are the odds? He says, surely there had to be an easier way to carry out the plan. Even more importantly, how is it that no one came forward in the century since and said, yes, I helped to set up the sinking of the Titanic in order to kill three men who were opposed to the formation of the U.S. Federal Reserve. Starting off this countdown, we have the unsinkable. Yes, the Titanic is still known to this day as the unsinkable ship that sank. But the fact of the matter is that it was never deemed unsinkable until after it sank. Promotional items for the Titanic and its sister ship, the Olympic, did say that, and I quote, "As far as it is possible to do so, these two wonderful vessels are designed to be unsinkable." But it never claimed that it was fully impossible to sink it. This term became further associated with the ship after a few publications who were covering the tragedy said that it was practically unsinkable, and survivors said that they personally had considered it unsinkable. Next at number 9, we have William Thomas Stead. Allegedly, Stead was a sort of psychic in a That's So Raven type of way. Prior to boarding and dying on the Titanic, Stead had premonitions where he saw his own death happen on a ship. He even wrote about this in 2 novels he wrote decades before the Titanic sank. One of the books was titled How the Mail Steamer Went Down in Mid-Atlantic by a Survivor, and the other one was From the Old World to the New. In the first book, a ship sinks and lives are lost due to a lack of lifeboats. In the second one, the ship collides with an iceberg. Coincidence? Or special powers? In our 8th spot, we have the SOS. The Titanic was not actually the first time that the internationally recognized Morse code SOS signal was used. After being initially introduced in 1906 at the International Conference on Wireless Communication at Sea, it started being used a lot in 1908, a whole 4 years before the Titanic sank. But it wasn't as commonly used by the British operators because they liked the original CQD code better, which stands for Come Quick, Danger. After trying and failing to get anyone's attention using CQD, one of the operators apparently said, "Send SOS. It's the new call and this may be your last chance to send it." They began sending SOS and CQD messages, but as we all know, it didn't catch anyone's attention in time. In our 7th spot, we have the Ghost of Disaster. This legend surrounds another published story foreshadowing the events of the Titanic. During the time of the sinking, the May issue of the popular magazine was already on the shelves. In this edition, there was a story written by T. Jenkins Haynes under the pseudonym Maine Clue Garnett, titled The White Ghost of Disaster. This story detailed an ocean liner colliding with an iceberg and the passengers aboard dying in the icy Atlantic waters. I mean, why did so many people have to write about ships colliding with icebergs and the passengers dying? The universe listens, you guys. And at number 6, we have the Heroic Dog. A large Newfoundland dog named Regal is said to have saved many lives during the sinking. Sadly, his owner drowned, but Regal managed to swim close to one of the lifeboats. And when the Carpathia came to find survivors, this lifeboat became dangerously close to the bow of the ship and was almost run over. But good old Regal started barking and made the crew aware of the lifeboat and of the survivors whose lives Regal had just saved. He survived for 3 hours in the water until he was able to be hauled on board. Now, this story has been questioned a lot, and some people believe that the person who later adopted Regal made it up. But dogs are amazing and have been known to save lives, so I believe you, Regal. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Molly Brown. Molly was given the nickname Unsinkable Molly Brown. Molly Brown was a philanthropist and socialite on her way home to America when the ship sank. But instead of just jumping in a lifeboat and being rescued, she made sure to help others. In addition to helping other people get into the lifeboat, she managed to convince the lifeboat that she was in to turn around and return to the Titanic so that even more people could be found and rescued. That is incredible, and honestly, I have no idea why this isn't being talked about more. Coming in at number 4, we have the Renault car. To anyone who has seen the movie Titanic, do you remember the iconic handprint on the car window scene? Well, while I have no idea if that actually happened, that car did certainly exist. In fact, it was the most precious cargo on board. The Renault car, which was brand new that year, was on its way to America with its purchaser when it went down with the ship. After it happened, the owner who survived the sinking filed an insurance claim that would now be upwards of 100,000 British pounds. This just goes to show how insanely valuable and expensive this car was. Apparently, there's a possibility that the car is still preserved underwater, but explorers and researchers have not been able to find it. In our 3rd spot, we have the guilt. This legend surrounds the designer of the Titanic himself, Thomas Andrews. A telegram that was read after the ship sank said that Andrews was heroic until the very end and that he had helped countless passengers onto the lifeboats. A chilling account of the last time he was spotted, though, just tells you how broken he was about the situation. He was apparently last seen staring at an image of Plymouth Sound, one of the stops that would have been on the return journey. He had his arms crossed in front of his body and his life jacket was on the table beside him. To me, this just shows you how dejected and guilt-ridden he must have felt. In our 2nd spot, we have the lifeboats. This legend surrounds the rumor that the Titanic cut corners with its lifeboats. Yes, it's true, there weren't enough lifeboats to save everyone, even if they were filled to capacity, but that's not because they decided to cheap out and break laws on how many lifeboats they had. In fact, they exceeded the laws. At the time, the amount of lifeboats required was based on the tonnage of the boat, not on the amount of passengers. So while the Titanic required enough lifeboats to save 1,060 people, they had enough to save 1,178 people. Still not enough, but definitely not against the laws at the time. The truth is, there weren't enough for how many passengers needed to be saved that night. And in our number 1 spot, we have the drunk man. Apparently, one of the lifeboats had capsized before it had the chance to be boarded, but one brave, smart, and very drunk man managed to command over 20 people to sit on top of the lifeboat and rock back and forth with the waves to stop it from sinking. When the Carpathia came to the rescue, they found the upside down lifeboat, and to their surprise, a man swam out from under it. Turns out the man who had been instructing the others on how to survive was so incredibly drunk that the alcohol in his system kept his blood warm enough to not die of hypothermia. I feel like one of those do not try this at home disclaimers is very much needed here. Please don't get any ideas.